So a year ago, I stood here before you in the shadow of the outbreak of war in Ukraine and on the eve of the Madrid summit. And I outlined my first order of the day to the army, that we needed a new approach, that we had to mobilize to deter Russian aggression and to prevent the spread of war in Europe. And I offered my firm view that despite the threat we faced, I had every confidence that the army would rise to the challenge. And it is. We have some way to go, but we have moved out. We have mobilized our minds. The Field Army and the Futures Directorate are studying Ukraine's emerging lessons and changing how we fight. We may not yet have found our generation's equivalent of Fuller or Little Heart, though James Browder might disagree, but in our new land operating concept, we do have the conceptual framework to underpin our transformation. And it's built on evidence, the evidence from significant consultation with academia, industry, and practitioners across the world, and tested assiduously by over 55 days of wargaming. We're planning to fight differently and to win. We have mobilized our equipment. We've led by example, committing British vehicles and weapons to our Ukrainian allies. British NLAW anti-tank weapon systems helped stop the Russians in their tracks outside Kyiv. Stormer anti-aircraft systems protect Ukrainian skies, and Challenger 2 tanks and AS-90 guns are, as we speak, spearheading Ukraine's counteroffensive. We have mobilized our training. Well over 17,000 Ukrainians have been trained on British soil, and intelligence intercepts tell us that the Russians know when they're fighting soldiers trained here, testament to our instructors' professionalism and to Ukrainian tenacity. Our efforts are saving the lives of Ukrainian citizen soldiers and helping them repel the Russians, and we and our international training partners can be proud. We have mobilized with industry. The purchase of Archer 6x6, signed and sealed within 2 months, has demonstrated that we can procure rapidly. We've committed to spend over £100 million on long-range precision fires. We've directed almost 200 million to be spent on new ISR. We have mobilized our productivity. 9,000 soldiers are currently protecting British interests overseas, with nearly 6,000 of them in Europe. Today's army is the most productive that it's ever been in my 38 years of service. Indeed, we've got broadly the same number of soldiers deployed as we did a decade ago, despite having reduced in size by 21% over that period. And we've mobilized the old, but sometimes neglected idea that land matters. Last year, I compared our generation's situation to that Europe faced in 1937, and I used that to signal the imperative to mobilize our armies and our industrial base to avert the spread of war. It was controversial for some, but others, especially those who lead land forces on NATO's eastern and northern flank, told me that it had particular resonance. And consider the alternative, an army that did not respond to war on NATO's borders, that wasted time through prolonged equivocation, as did our forebears in the 1920s and 30s, that did not strengthen its credibility and resilience. That army would leave the nation and NATO weaker. And it would be an army that sooner or later would inevitably meet with a shock. Now, unlike our predecessors, we are safer for now. NATO's stronger, Russia is temporarily weaker, and Ukrainian bravery and sacrifice is buying us time. Time to modernize, time to train ourselves, time to ensure that we are prepared so that we can deter. The armed forces of Ukraine have granted us an opportunity to avert the spread of war, a chance to reverse some of the disinvestments made during the peace dividend that came with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that we all hoped would prevail. But for every extra month that we're privileged to gain, there is a terrible cost, one that we can never take for granted, nor one that we can irresponsibly squander. We must do more. We owe it to Ukraine. But no matter how this war ends, and it must be through a Ukrainian victory, I believe the Russian threat will remain. Despite setbacks, Moscow's intent has been revealed to the world, and this will be a generational struggle. It's one we must arm ourselves for. It's one we must be ready for. Now, we're well supported in meeting the threat, thanks to the government's generous settlement in 2021's integrated review and recognition of the changing strategic situation that will be reflected in this year's refresh, plus the imminent revision to the Defence Command Paper, which builds on all this work. And thanks to the modernisation efforts of our sister services, we're part of a defence that is getting stronger. And we're not standing alone. We're privileged to draw on the strength that only comes from having close allies and partners, especially within NATO and the JEF. We share the same professionalism, values, and determination to support Ukraine, however long it takes. And with Vilnius only a few weeks away, we meet ahead of what will be a crucial summer for NATO. So I'm pleased to welcome 12 of my fellow chiefs here today, and I'm extremely grateful to both my Finnish and French friends and colleagues, Pierre Schill and Pasi Välimäki, for agreeing to share their insights with us. But we must all remember that autocracies, and those who lead them, whoever they may be, fight wars very differently to democracies, and their lack of accountability makes that so. And despite the lively debate around the capability of the Russian forces and the ambiguity over political stability in Russia itself, one thing is certain: Putin's army is holding ground. His soldiers' boots remain lodged on Ukrainian soil, and for Kyiv to succeed, they must be forced from it. Now, it's too early to tell how successful the ongoing counteroffensive will be, but Ukrainian shaping activity has been impressive, and the armed forces of Ukraine are fighting with great skill, courage, and determination. And as we look to the future, I'm inclined to follow the advice who live on NATO's eastern flank, those who know you should never write off Moscow, those who know that throughout its long and turbulent history, Russia has been a country of comebacks. We should also consider that a fractured Russia is unlikely to be a good thing for European security. Irrespective of the turbulent events this weekend, Putin's warped motives are unabated. Internal debate in Russia revolves around how to fight the war more effectively, not how to end it. The Kremlin continues to direct mobilization. And as Jack Watling and Nick Reynolds have so eloquently demonstrated, the Russian army is learning, albeit at a horrendous price. Living standards haven't dropped. Russian arms factories are on a war footing, with workers taking on extra shifts to keep the production lines going. And Russia is by no means a nation engaged in total war. In the Great Patriotic War, Russia dedicated 61% of its GDP to the war effort. This so-called special military operation is drawing only 3%. It has the means to go much further. Failure to defend Ukraine, deter further aggression, and extinguish Russian expansionist ambition risks undermining an international order that's maintained peace and ensured prosperity for 8 decades. And I'm sobered by the number of governments that appear to have accepted Putin's narrative that this is a defensive war. So we must acknowledge the limitations of soft power and recognize that preserving our international system demands the restoration of deterrence. Deterrence underpinned by hard power and credibility, combat credibility. And for UK deterrence to succeed, we need credible armed forces that are balanced across all of the domains. Those who believe that our geography allows us to minimize investment on land, or that we can simply hide behind the armies of other NATO nations, are simply wrong. Land matters. It's where people live. And as the great naval strategist Julian Corbett wrote in 1911, it is where great issues between nations at war have always been decided, except in the rarest of cases. His words ring true today, and his logic applies across the globe, something made clear to me at the Land Forces Pacific Conference last month, when I learned just how central land forces are to setting the Pacific theatre and deterring aggression. They extend reach, reassure partners, and secure critical lines and nodes of communication. Even in the 21st century, An army's credibility will be measured by how skillfully it can conduct the full orchestra of war, its mastery of combined arms maneuver, and its ability to integrate with others. For success will only come from being part of a modernised, multi-domain force. This is nothing new. The Army's always been at its very best when operating together with the other services. And while we need our sister services to win on land, I'm also determined that the Army plays its part in enabling them to succeed in their domains. And will do so faced with a changing character of war. The deep battle, as we're seeing, is increasing in importance. The close battle is playing out at greater range. We're witnessing the rise of autonomy and seeing the centrality of data in modern warfare. We've had the first glimpse of the revolution that artificial intelligence, robotics, and potentially quantum computing will bring. Their effects will be felt through that timeless battle of intervention and counterinvention even. But as we look towards the 2030s, to survive and win, armies must punch further, harder, and process data faster than their opponents. And Ukraine's reminded us that success can only be achieved with a secure land industrial base with the stockpiles necessary to sustain the fight. That mass is still indispensable. That we need to plan to reinforce and regenerate the force. For to only focus on the first echelon, those troops that we'll put into battle at the start of a war, is simply to prepare for failure. But it would also be remiss of me not to emphasize that we should treat many of these lessons with caution. One wonders what shape we would be in if, in the first few days after the Russian invasion, we'd sold off all our armor to invest in TB2 or one-way attack drones. Context is all. So what does this mean for the British Army? Well, we must never again be unprepared as our forebears were in the 1930s. And so I'm inclined to heed Henry Kissinger's advice to leaders as he celebrated his 100th birthday last month. Identify where you are, pitilessly. Many of our platforms are outdated and not fit for purpose. I trained on the 432 armoured personnel carrier in the 1980s when it was already 30 years old. It's still in service today. Our armoured reconnaissance vehicle, CVRT, came into service in 1973. Our armoured infantry fighting vehicle, Warrior, in 1987, and Challenger 2 in 1998. These are rotary dial telephones in an iPhone age. Now, change is coming. Over £35 billion is being spent on new equipment over the next 10 years. 35 of our 38 existing platforms are going out of service and being replaced by new capabilities. They will make us one of the most modern, connected, and lethal armies in the world. The Army is restoring momentum, but we've got to accept that our procurement record has been poor, and we've allowed our land industrial base to wither. And furthermore, our Army Reserve is not as capable and credible as it needs to be. Future Soldier put us on a path to reconstitution, but it was unrealistic about our reserve's ability to reinforce regular structures in the necessary time frame. And we're still too bureaucratic. Despite my pledge last year, whole fleet management's still with us. Now, we've got to rectify these faults, and there isn't a moment to lose. So we've got to take the same spirit that we've seen under mobilization and turn it towards transformation, the next step in the reforms that started with Future Soldier. First, we will think and fight differently. The initiation of Project Wavell and the release of the new land operating concept are important steps, but there can be no room for conceptual complacency. We've got to keep testing and wargaming our assumptions. We have to keep refining our theory of victory. We have to use hard evidence to make our force design decisions. And for those of you who are skeptical about whether we can do this at pace, I recommend you get down to Warminster and see the Army's experimentation and trials group. You'll witness the future of British land warfare. Second, last year I said that I was prepared to look at the structures of our Army if I judged that it would make us better prepared to fight in Europe. And that time is now. We must have the confidence to structure ourselves to meet our core purpose, to fight and win wars on land, and provide genuine utility and credibility to NATO when called upon, while still being able to operate globally in support of the United Kingdom's interests. So over the coming months, we will uplift the 1st Division into a credible land component command headquarters, one capable of integrating effects across all domains. And this will include resubordinating 16 Air Assault Brigade combat team under the 1st Division and looking at how the Army's Global Response Force can contribute to the Joint Force. We will optimise the 3rd Division to warfight under an enhanced Allied Rapid Reaction Corps. These formations will be at the very heart of our commitment to European deterrence, maximising the opportunity that the new NATO force model presents us. By the end of this year, Joint Helicopter Command will have evolved into a Joint Aviation Command. This new organisation will pioneer uncrewed aviation into the 2030s, reflecting the emergence of human-machine teaming technology and the rapid proliferation of uncrewed aerial systems. And will unlock the true potential of land special operations in enabling the joint force and supporting our NATO allies. So 77 Brigade, together with the Army Special Operations Brigade and our Cyber and Electromagnetic Activity Group, CEMA, have the potential to be a world-leading special operations capability. And finally, in the spirit of Haldane, our reserve force will form a true second echelon, a reserve that provides our nation with resilience and mass. And by moving away from our insistence on equivalence between our regulars and reserves, it will also be one truly designed for our reservists, recognising that they are constrained only by the time they can give and not by their ambition or desire to serve. Third, we'll make the Army more lethal. We've already let contracts to replace the ammunition sent to Ukraine, and we've committed to increasing our stockpiles of key and general munitions. The next 2 years will see the delivery of Boxer, Ajax, more than 60 recapitalised M270 rocket launchers and Archer 6x6. We'll reprioritise investment towards remote and autonomous systems and dismounted situational awareness capabilities. We'll continue to enhance our long-range fires capabilities, including investigating those like PRISM, which enable us to support the other domains from the land, such as through attacking an adversary's air defence system or sinking enemy ships. We'll invest in air defence, tripling our short range and doubling our medium range capabilities. And the Army AI Centre is already established, and by 2024, we'll have built a new land component data fusion and analytics engine. Both exponentially increase the tempo of our decision making and our targeting. And in doing all this, we will maximise the land industrial strategy's full potential. I've now seen for myself the full extent of the decline of our lack of investment in our sovereign land industrial base. It is essential that we relight the furnaces and work with industry to build national resilience and help our country prosper. We will wholeheartedly support DNS's reform of our acquisition processes to ensure we can play our part in supporting the UK's new science and technology framework and fully benefit from the nation's world-leading innovation and research. And finally, I'm determined that we maintain our commitment to our soldiers and civil servants. When, like so many of our international partners, we're faced with a highly competitive market for talent, we've got to do our best to recruit our nation's best. And we are a powerful tool of social mobility. I was recently struck by something I read in the recent Times Educational Commission's final report, that in Britain it typically takes 5 generations for someone to go from the bottom to the middle of income distribution. In Denmark, it takes 2. But if you serve a career in the army, you can do it in 1. We must also acknowledge the pressures that our increased productivity, in many respects to be celebrated, places on our people and our families. Parts of the army are working incredibly hard to maintain our outputs, and the line between good busy and bad busy is extremely fine, as AFCAS demonstrates. So we've got to lessen the negative impacts of service life where we can. £2 billion is being spent on refurbishing our accommodation. Our soldiers now have access to wraparound childcare. Through programme Castle and our talent management system will provide people greater ownership of their careers and ensure that we have the right person, regular reservist or civil servant, in the right role. And we'll keep doubling down on our efforts to cut unnecessary policy and inefficient processes. We've got to spend more time on our core purpose, and where we can, we should fully maximize the potential of AI and machine learning in our headquarters. And I am utterly determined that we continue to set the culture of teamwork and professionalism that enables our soldiers to prevail. But our commitment to our people must go deeper still. As we can see today in Ukraine, the margin between success and failure in a land campaign comes down to soldiers. Tired, thirsty, frightened, and hungry, with uneven loads digging into their backs, sweat in their eyes, and blisters on their hands and feet. It's they who deliver victory, they who are our very lifeblood. And as Ukraine demonstrates, the only true test of an army is war itself. So as I close, I'm reminded of another lone individual who stood before a RUSI audience some 50 years ago. He said, "I'm tempted to declare dogmatically that whatever doctrine the armed forces are working on now, they've got it wrong. I'm also tempted to declare that it doesn't matter that they've got it wrong. What matters is their capacity to get it right quickly when the moment arrives." He was, of course, the late, great Professor Sir Michael Howard, possibly our nation's greatest soldier scholar. He was with the Guards at Salerno. He'd smelt the stench of battle. He knew war's enduring nature. And standing, as we all do, in his shadow today, I sense his words might still ring true. They can't be an excuse for complacency. As we're learning in Ukraine, adaptation comes at a cost in lives. And with a land war raging in Europe, I'd argue that we have little excuse for getting it wrong. So let us all therefore pledge that our generation will not squander the opportunity we've been given, both by our government, but principally by the sacrifice of the brave people of Ukraine. Let us embrace it. Let us ensure that when our army is next asked to fight on behalf of the people of this country, it is as best prepared as it can be. For this is the army that our soldiers and our nation deserves.